Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studio, it's time for Family Business Radio. Showcasing outstanding family businesses and the advisors who assist them.
Good afternoon. You're listening to another episode of Family Business Radio. I am your host, Anthony Chen. Today we have two great and amazing guests. To kind of kick us off the show, we have Ali Jamal with Stablegold Hospitality. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So kind of share with us your story of what got you into real estate.
Yeah, so I'll try to keep this somewhat condensed for your audience. But essentially, I bought my first piece of real estate when I was 19 years old. I had saved up about $20,000 between a couple of jobs while I was in college, and the deal that I had with my mother at the time, when I was saving this money, is that once I had saved this $20,000, she would come on my 19th birthday to the car dealership with me and co-sign on a loan for a new car. And unfortunately, or fortunately, as when the time came around, I went to speak to my mom on my birthday about going to the car dealership with that $20,000, and she looked at me for a couple of seconds and she says, "Son, you might be one of the stupidest people I've ever seen in my life, because if you think I'm going to let you take that $20,000 and put it towards that car versus something that's going to hopefully pay you into the future, you are nuts." So begrudgingly, she grabbed my ear, took me to a development in downtown Vancouver. I lived in Vancouver, Canada at the time. And there was a condo going for sale for about $170,000. And so she made, to make a long story short, she made me put that $20K as a down payment on that condo. To give you context of how right she was over time, that same condo, which I still own, by the way, as of today, but when I left Vancouver when I was 27 to come to Atlanta, by that time, that same condo was worth about $2.5 million. So, and that's somewhat abnormal because, of course, Vancouver's real estate was just crazy during that period of time. So part of that is luck, but it serves a very serves as a very good lesson over and above the fact that if it wasn't for my mom, I'd probably be driving a rusted out Honda Civic Si right now. But, over and above that, the appreciation opportunity in real estate, if you buy in the right markets, is definitely, by far one of the better alternatives from an investing perspective, in my opinion. So that's kind of what started me as a real estate investor at an early age. Over time, as the valuation of that condo went up, I started to take out equity from that piece of real estate. And then once again, my first thought process was, let me take that equity and now buy a nice car. And again, my mom brought me down to earth and was like, no, you're going to buy another condo. And to make a long story short, over the span of between the age of 19 and 27, I had built up a portfolio as a side hustle of I think by that time it was 20 homes or something like that. And I was doing a whole bunch of different things. So aside from working my corporate job that I was working at the time, and owning these places, I started to rent out the homes on a room by room basis to get more cash flow. Some of them I would, I bought as duplexes, fourplexes. So I was getting a lot of cash flow from these assets. My challenge was, though, all the money that I was making from rent from these assets, the money was going straight to mortgages. And so there was really no strong cash flow, or not strong enough cash flow, where I could pivot into real estate investing full time, which was really what I wanted to do. That was where my passion was. And from an economic perspective, I could see that that's where the real payoff was going to be for me in the long run. And so I'm speaking to my accountant in 2011. Once again, I was about 27 years old. And I was, telling her I really want to do real estate investing full time, but I'm just not in the position to do so. And she's like, "Look, Ali, there's a huge, recession going on in the US right now. And what you're buying houses for here in Vancouver, you could get 100 unit apartment complex in cities like Atlanta or St. Louis or whatever. And if you can operate it correctly, you'll be able to live off the cash flow of one of those properties." And so to me, I couldn't even it didn't make any sense to me because I am in Vancouver buying condos for like $700,000 and mortgaging most of that, and it was just such different context. So she connected me with a broker here in Atlanta, who showcased to me a 127 unit hotel in Roswell, Georgia. So I flew out, visited the property, walked through it, and found really quickly that what she was saying was right. There was a lot of opportunity to acquire decent assets at a very low price point at that point in time. And so the second question, once I walked the property for me was, okay, looks like a good potential deal, but what would I do with it? Because here you have a exterior corridor hotel in a suburb in Atlanta. Most hotels in that area and across the city and probably across the US at the time were not doing very well because of the recession. And so I was driving around the neighborhood just trying to kind of figure out what local occupancy rates were and all that kind of stuff. And basically all the local hotels in that area were running at very low occupancy rates, probably 30% and below. But the hotel right adjacent to this one that I was looking at potentially acquiring was a Studio 6. And for those of you who are not familiar with Studio 6, it's basically an offshoot of the Motel 6 model. And it's basically for individuals who want to stay for longer periods of time. So like weekly kind of stays. And this Studio 6 was jam-packed. The parking lot was overflowing. And I was like, what in the world are they doing that's so different than these other hotels? So I decided to stay there that night. Stay to the Studio 6. And I found really quickly what their business model was really just brilliant. Essentially, they were running an apartment complex, but under hotel regulations, which means that if a tenant or a customer of yours does not pay for their stay, instead of you being tied into a 60-day eviction process, you just get them out the next day. You call the cops and they're gone. So that protects your cash flow. So here you have a business where you can fill your units fairly quickly because the price for rent is going to be fairly low, but then you don't have to fight for your evictions and deal with all the costs that go along with that. And so to me, I was like, if we can just copy what these guys are doing, we should be good because the cost of this 127 unit hotel was very low. Full transparency, it was about $1 million at the time. Mm-hmm. So well below replacement cost, right? To build that hotel, even at that time from the ground up would have cost me $5 or $6 million minimum. And so just if you're picking it up at $1 million, you already know you're buying value. And so that's essentially what we did. So fairly quickly, I was able to raise capital between family and friends. And I was lucky to be able to do that because honestly, I had no track record in the hotel space. So I was really, my mom remortgaged one of her homes, was able to get some money from uncles in England, was able to, scrounge up a little bit of my own capital, and we were able to put together the $1 million to acquire this hotel. So now put together the money, bought the hotel. Now we had a business concept, which was run it like an apartment complex, but I didn't really still know how it would do and how we would be able to kind of, generate the traffic from the next door neighbor, Studio 6. Within about 60 days, we implemented the business model, which essentially, once again, nothing extraordinarily brilliant. It was just, what are they charging a week for the rooms? Okay, they're charging $400. Let's do $200. That was basically it, just to see how much traffic we could take over. Within about 90 days, we're sitting about 80% occupancy at a $30 average daily rate per night. So let's just say 127 rooms, so let's say 115, 120 of them rented a night at $30. You can do the math, about, let's say, approximately $3,000 a day. You've already created $1 million business very quickly on a property that you picked up for $1 million. You can't really beat those numbers, So my investors were obviously very happy. And part of this was I was able to manage the operating costs by living in the hotel. So, and that was a blessing at the time because it forced me to learn the business from the ground up. And so I lived in the hotel for 3 years, ran pretty much every component of the business. And now my investors were very happy. So as you guys already know, if your investors are happy, the likelihood is they're going to want to, reinvest into the snowball. And that's really what happened. So we started acquiring more hotels, and as time went on, we kind of scaled the business. So as of today, we've grown the business. We have 16 hotel locations across the country, all within the same model, representing approximately 3,000 units, 3,000 doors. And then we've diversified into other real estate divisions. So we have a vacation rental division, which has about 20 homes or so. We have a residential division, which has about 20 homes. We have an event hall division where we serve as like a landlord on event halls, which are about, I think, 7 or 8 of those. And we also have a commercial division, which is growing. So, overall now we've kind of built a portfolio of about $80 million of assets under management over the last 13 years. And it's just been a great journey. It's been fun.
Great. Wow. So at the end of the day, did you finally get a car?
I finally did get a car. So it took me till I was like 38 to finally buy my dream car. So my dream car has always been a McLaren.
Oh.
And so I ended up getting a McLaren, just 3 years ago for the first time. Now, to give you context on that as well, the funny part of that is up until I got my McLaren, I was driving a Ford pickup for the longest period of time. So, and it all started with me because I never drove a pickup back in Vancouver, but when I got the first hotel, I needed to go to Home Depot, pick up supplies, and you're doing all this kind of stuff, and it's a little bit more rugged at that point. And so for the longest period of time, I was driving a pickup. Even when I got my corporate office, I still couldn't, because I was so comfortable in the truck then. And then really by that point, it's like your need and want for that. So I kind of had outgrown it. It wasn't really a big value proposition, but I looked back and I was like, you know what? This has been on my bucket list for a long time. And I'm not going to, I don't want to be 80 years old enjoying, a sports car. Which is fine if you are, but for me, I wanted to enjoy it while I still had, some semblance of black hair left. Okay. And, so that's pretty much gone now, but I was able to get in at least those couple of years with it. So,
yeah. Well, now, how was it like turning the tables on your mom where you're approaching her about, and of course with your family members of this investment opportunity here in Georgia?
So how was it in terms of what was their response?
Well, not just her, but kind of turning the tables on her because she was the one who brought you into real estate.
Yes.
Now you're bringing her a deal instead of her bringing you a prospect.
Well, moms are always going to be the easiest sell because they're going to they're going to look over all your flaws, right? And they're really going to, for as hard as she was, and she had a tough life coming to Canada as a refugee, and she had much tougher life than I did. So, but she's always going to be my number one fan, obviously. So, she hesitated for a couple seconds, asked a lot of tough questions, and then she was like, okay, if you want to do it, go, I'm going to support you. We're just, and I've been blessed with someone like that in my life. So yeah, on my mom's side, it was a little bit easier. My uncles, I have 3 uncles in London who were, were very shrewd investors. And so they had a lot of tough questions. And so me being 27, not running a business per se before, I had rental properties, but that's very different than running a full on operation. They were, they were coming at me with every tough question you could imagine. And I didn't pass the test of most of their questions, but they still, were able to look past that. Side note though, one of those uncle's investors at 75. When I took over the hotel for the first 3 months, he stayed on site with me to make sure that his money wasn't going on. He was like, I'm going to make sure that you're doing the right thing. So, even though I was sweat equity, I did have a lot of support. And even at the, he came in a later stage in his life, but the wisdom that he provided was way outweighed the monetary investment. Just having someone, and a lot of times, especially in that kind of scenario, it's not even the wisdom per se. It's just having the moral support. Someone would be like, you know what, this looks like a pretty tough project. You might have, taken a bigger bite than what you can chew. However, let's do it. I got your back. We're going to make this work. Sometimes just having that gets you over some of the hard stuff. You know what I mean? Because the wisdom side of things, I mean, we have enough tools now where you can Google answers to stuff, right? Like if I'm having a hard time with the hotel at whatever, I can learn it fairly quickly with all the tools that we have technology wise. But what we don't have is that personal touch, right? Where someone can be like, hey, you know what? You'll be all right. Today was a tough day. Let's start from scratch tomorrow. And that's what he provided, which was more valuable than anything else.
And kind of speaking of wisdom, there's two, I guess, elephant questions that I imagine our listeners definitely want to ask you, because you've experienced approaching family members for investments in business. That's a very touchy subject. And then, of course, the other side is being able to find more or less a mentor or someone to kind of be your cheerleader per se. Kind of share with the audience, like how was your mindset going in with your relatives, or in this case, your uncle, and not just passing the trial of the questions, but kind of convincing them enough, or kind of what the thought process going through all that was like.
So the history behind my relationship with the uncles is interesting, because so what happened before leading up to that time is between the ages of going back to 19 and 27, when I was back in Vancouver, every summer I would have to go to London to work in their hotels. So I had already and I was working for free. It's not like it's like a paid internship. It's like, no, you're working here because you're our bloodline, and it is what it is, right? Okay. So it was that sort of thing. And I remember, just to give you context of kind of their philosophy on life and business, I remember the first day I was working with them, I came downstairs, jeans and a t-shirt. Okay. Very West Coast kind of, and I'm thinking, it's not like you have a Hilton or something, like, these are just basic bed and breakfast, and I'm working the desk. I'm here for free. Kind of had a different thought process than they did, for sure. He looked at me for a couple of seconds. He's like, go back upstairs, put on your suit and tie, and that's what you're going to wear every single. And so every day I had to wear a suit and tie the entire day. And that British kind of just strong, strict kind of component of like how to run a business got instilled in me very early. So like even till today, I still wear a suit and tie to my own office. I don't obviously have to answer to anyone to wear that. And people a lot of times ask me like, why do you wear a suit and tie? Like you don't even, and it's so ingrained in me that it's just a part of how I approach my day now, because it gives me that structure and it anchors me. And so going back to your original question, that relationship was already in place. So by the time he had come out there, we had such a history of working together from that aspect of things that, it very nicely aligned.
So then for our listeners that were thinking they can just have a secret where they can just immediately approach their family members, and if they don't have that history, the receptors might be a little different.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. I think like with anything in life, it's about branding yourself, right? And so even coming back to the family context, you're not going to get anyone to invest in you if they don't believe in the person that you are. So my brand, I guess at that time in my life, was not so much successful execution of business, because I didn't have that track record, but it was integrity for sure, because they knew that, going back to the example, I worked for free every summer, right? Without even asking for a payment after the first time. And doing certain things. So I think it's just like family and real life business, there's a lot of similarities. And I think so I created a brand within my family where they knew that they can trust me, and that even on the real estate side that I had already started, there was some level of track record and success, and they probably saw what I was doing, at least from a hard work perspective and some of those things. So I think I built that brand within my family, and they were willing to invest in that. So whether it's outside of family or inside, I think it's going to be very challenging to find investors, and if people don't have trust in where they're giving their capital. And so, yeah, that relationship and track record definitely, has to be there to a certain extent, except with moms, they'll overlook some stuff. So
yeah, cool. Well, then kind of going back to your experience, you shared about living in the hotel for like 3 years, but you've also already had some kind of hotel hospitality experience. Kind of share with the audience, like what you've learned that would not have been possible if you had not lived there on site. Because when we're talking about real estate investors, a lot of people have this kind of dream where there's these ads on YouTube and everything else. Oh, you can be a passive investor, just dump money here and then magic happens. But I'm going to assume it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I'd say, look, if you want to be a passive investor, and we call that an LP, right? Like some limited partner. And there's, as you said, there's so many pitches out there to get LPs into deals. You can make money as a LP or a passive investor, but you're not going to make as much as the person managing the asset. So you got to understand that, number one, and hopefully most people it's advertised that way. Sometimes it's not, from what I see. And the other thing is that I think just in general, I would say from my experience, and I don't know if this is an industry standard, but like I would say if people are telling you as an LP or a passive investor that you're going to get a 10% return on your money, realistically it's probably going to be like 5, right? Like it's just the advertising number that people are going to push you on versus like the reality number there's going to be a huge spread there. So that I would say that I'd say if there's someone who wants to now get into the actual active management and ownership of real estate, my advice for them is start small. So start and like that doesn't mean that you can't grow a real estate portfolio, but like don't try to take on an apartment building right away. Buy a single family residential home, and if you want to try to push cash flow, see what you can do with that home. Turn it into a vacation rental. Rent it out by the room. There's a whole bunch of third-party programs like companies like Padlist and all this other kind of stuff that will manage your room rentals now. There's so many creative ways in which you can monetize that single-family home in a strong way that you know the sky is really the limit. And if you can get even more creative and start acquiring homes utilizing owner finance models or creative finance models where you're not paying the 9 or 10% the banks are charging you, but you can work out a situation where someone who needs to really get rid of their home will work with you and give you a 3 or 4% interest rate. There's all these interesting strategies you can use on that very small micro level that you can hone your skills on and then start building.
So for our listeners that are kind of hearing your origin story, they're thinking, all right, well, I might not have family members I can just lean on or work over summer for free. I'm a little older than 19. You did share the tidbit of, well, just start with one and start small. Well, for those who might have started small and then kind of one step in or half a foot out, because you mentioned it was kind of your side gig, at what point kind of in your career where you knew, all right, I need to like go full all in or just let this kind of continue as a kind of a quote unquote side thing?
I think it comes down to, and I hate because I think this word is like overly used, but like I think it really does come down to passion. If that's something you want to do, so it's like I don't think everyone's meant to or built to do real estate investing full time or become an entrepreneur full time. I don't think there's anything wrong at all for someone to be an entrepreneur, to work within an organization and maybe even negotiate equity in that organization or do something of that nature and then keep a side hustle of real estate or work for an organization, forget the entrepreneur aspect of it, just get a good, decent salary and start investing on the side. I mean, going back to my mother, you know, she's a refugee from East Africa, came to Canada, was working clerical jobs, nothing extraordinary. She was making $30,000, $40,000 a year at most. And she built up a portfolio of like 20, 30 homes, right? She was a multimillionaire as a single mom, as a refugee, much more impressive than anything I've not even close to that. So, you know, if you think about that, I don't think you have to by any means get into real estate investing full time. I think you can do what you love, do it on the side as a nice investment vehicle. And you can really merge both. If you want to do it full time and if you have that passion, then I think there's a lot of different pivots that you can utilize. But I would say make sure, like everyone's story is going to be different and everyone's backdrop will be different. So like you said, like a lot of people are not going to have the opportunity for, you know, family investors or even investors at all. Right. And so you need to build that base. You need to start while you're working, go to meetups, sell people on the fact that you don't have the capital, but you are willing to be sweat equity in, you know, even smaller deals. And I think once you can build that smaller base, then you can kind of go from there. It's just going to take you longer than it would someone with those connections. That makes sense.
Yeah. So as kind of closing out the questions for our younger audience that has got their ears perked up, what kind of advice would you have given to your younger self if you had started all over?
Take more risks if you can. So, and what I mean, so I think if you're 19 and you have a little bit of income coming in and you can acquire more than one piece of real estate, I would absolutely do it, because you have a lot of runway ahead of you where even if you fail, you can get back on your feet and, and succeed again, build up your portfolio again. So I would say plant as many seeds as you can early, because the time to take risks is really, in my opinion, in your younger age versus doing it at 45, right? And 50, where you're going to have a lot more responsibilities and things of that nature. Obviously, that's somewhat balanced with the fact that at that age, at 19, you're not going to have the same financial resources as you would at 45. So it's, it's a little bit of a tricky puzzle, but if you can figure out how to take more risks that are calculated at an early stage in your life, I think it's going to pay you back significantly more going into the future. Because as you know, being a real estate or being an investor yourself, the earlier you get started and the more runway you have, the more successful you're going to be from a compounding factor into the future. And so just start early and be as aggressive as you can early on.
So I would assume that risk is not so much driving around in sports cars at 19, but more so throwing your money at investments.
Absolutely, yeah. So from a risk perspective, I mean, absolutely geared more towards the investment side of things. Put your capital into more things early on that's going to pay you into the future.
Great. So how can our listeners reach out and find you to learn more?
So my personal website is alijamal.com. And from there, you can go to any of our company websites. We have various companies, as I mentioned, in the various sectors that we're involved in real estate. But the best place to start is alijamal.com. And that's a great way to connect. I connect with anyone who messages me through there. So feel free to do so.
Great. Thank you.
Awesome.
Right. Our next guest, we have Lalitha Alladi with Alladi Law.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Great. Thank you for coming on. Kind of share with us your story. What got you into law, particularly immigration law?
Well, I think that when I first started looking at different options for careers in undergrad, I thought it was going to be in the sciences. It wasn't until I really started getting into organic chemistry that I realized maybe that wasn't my thing. And I really enjoyed math. And again, you'd say math, law, where are you seeing the connection here? Well, my dad was a math professor, is still a math professor. And so he told me, if law is something that you're starting to feel interested in, continue to take more math courses, because that's only going to improve your logical thinking. And I know that he had his own reasons for pushing me in math, but at the same time, I don't think he was wrong, because I really enjoyed that form of thinking where there's logic behind the arguments you make, and there's sort of a wrong and a right answer, and I enjoyed that type of a thought process. So I started I joined the Pre-Legal Honor Society, started looking into what it takes to join law school, and being from an Asian background, we tend to get pushed in certain areas for career paths. But I would say that unlike most, my family was excited that I had started thinking about law, because we did have law in our family in previous generations. So although 2 generations had sort of skipped over it, they were really happy to see that I was interested in that it was coming back into the family again. So they were really encouraging about me joining law school. Now, once I was in law school, one of the things I enjoyed the most was actually trial advocacy. It so happened the university that I went to, Stetson University, was number 1 in trial advocacy. So that could have a lot to do with the fact as to why I enjoyed it, because they had the best program. So I loved being in court and being in trial. So my career started off as a prosecutor. Till this day, I might even say that was one of my most favorite jobs that I've held. Unfortunately, it didn't allow me to have the lifestyle as I grow my family that I would need. So I did decide to go into, a different area of law. At that time, I went into bankruptcy law because that was the recession. And that's where a lot of lawyers were needed the most during that time. So I was in bankruptcy law for a few years, but then I had an opportunity to really learn about immigration and work for a company where I was able to deal with business immigration, which is something that I've been interested in for quite some time, but just didn't know where to get my feet wet. And that was a really great place to learn immigration law. Since then, I've now been practicing immigration alone for 10 years. And my interest in that is it just comes from a natural place. I'm an immigrant, and I've seen the different types of immigrant stories that people have had, whether it's friends or family. And, you know, when you really look at it, other than Native Americans, everyone several generations away, or maybe just this past generation, has some type of immigrant story. That's why there are all of these genealogy tests, right? Everyone wants to know they're 25% this and 17% that because they recognize that they are all from different places. So I feel like, you know, I can do a small part in contributing to these immigrant stories by helping them really make their dreams come true here. Mm-hmm. So that's how it started.
So kind of share with us, for when people think of immigration, they usually think of just spousal or family immigration. Mm-hmm. Kind of share with us a story in terms of like a business owner mindset. What circumstance would an employer consider an immigration attorney? Absolutely.
So, you know, there are several ways that might happen. So take, for example, some larger companies. They may have an individual who is a CEO in their Brazil office, but now they need to bring them to the U.S. They need them to run this section of a new company that they're starting within their larger framework. You know, they have different companies and they're merging companies and things like that. So they need someone to head it up while they're here. Well, they need that individual who already has the experience within their company to come here and run that part of their business. How are they going to do that without that individual having work authorization? So we would help them attain a visa that they're eligible for, bring them here, and with that employment-based visa, they automatically also get work authorization. And the thing about those visas are they're all temporary. So they may be for 2 years, 3 years, certain number of years. And if that person has been here for such a time that the employer feels, you know what, they are doing so well, we can see them being a permanent employee and we could really use them in this way. You know, they can help us grow our business in this way. And that employee is also interested in staying here. Then that's the time that they're going to discuss applying for a green card for that individual. It's not always the case that people who come here on a temporary visa want to stay in the U.S. I've had situations where they're here for a certain number of years and they said, nope, I did my time. I was here for the 3 years that I said I would help do XYZ for the business. Mm-hmm. But my life is really back in Brazil or wherever they're from. And they said, you know, I want to return and I like the benefits better. You know, some countries have better maternity leaves and vacations and things like that. And they said, that's really where my life is. You're all working too hard in the U.S. and they may return. So it's not always the case that they want to be here forever. They do their bit sometimes and leave, and other times they want to stay and continue to work for that company.
Now you mentioned the words visa and green card.
Yes.
For those who are not in the know when it comes to immigration law, what are the differences?
Yeah. So, you know, I say visa and green card because I feel that that's what most people understand. But if you really start to get technical about it, they call them an immigrant visa and a non-immigrant visa. That's where I think it starts to get confusing. So this is what I mean. When I say visa, I'm referring to people wanting to be here on a temporary basis. So visas can range from a visitor visa, someone just coming to the U.S., visiting for up to 6 months. Or a visa could be that they're coming here on an employment-based visa and they want to be here for 3 years. But all of these visas or non-immigrant visas mean they're here only for a temporary basis. Their intention is what matters. Their intention is not to be here permanently. When I refer to a green card, that's permanent residence. They are looking to stay here permanently, make this their permanent home, and settle down here, and they're letting the United States know, I want to settle down here, and they're applying for it on that more permanent basis. The next level is citizenship, right? You're saying, no, I want to be a U.S. citizen with more rights, not just live here, but really be part of the bread and butter of America. And I want to vote here. I have certain rights that I accrue by becoming a U.S. citizen. I can serve on the jury, things like that. So they have more rights. And for some time, there's also talk about, how there are different rights that permanent residents have versus what citizens have. I'll just give you an example. If someone were to get arrested for something, okay, if someone were to get arrested and they were a U.S. citizen versus they were arrested as a permanent resident, different things can happen. As a U.S. citizen, you are not going to get kicked out of the country. You'll serve your jail time, your prison time, your probation, whatever you're supposed to serve. But as a permanent resident, if you were to be arrested for something or you were convicted for something, now deportation proceedings can start to get you kicked out of the country, to get you deported. So you have a different level of rights depending on which type of status you have in the U.S.
Oh, did not know that. Then speaking of, and then kind of circling back on the green card situation.
Yeah.
With those who are kind of already have a green card here and they're thinking of bringing other family members over here, what is that process like? Is it just any family member, or how tied in do they have, or close do they have to be?
Yeah, really, to sponsor any family member, it is a very close-knit circle that you can sponsor. Green card holders can sponsor their spouse. They can sponsor their child, a minor child. There's very little that a green card holder can sponsor. Once you become a U.S. citizen, now you can sponsor your fiance, your spouse, or your minor children. You can sponsor a brother or sister. Don't get me wrong. That's going to take about 15, 20 years. It's a very long wait time. That's a whole nother discussion as to how that works. There are wait times depending on the type of family member that you are. So I could sponsor a minor child. That will be much faster. Or I might sponsor a child who's over the age of 18 but is unmarried. So there are different classifications even for a child. Or there's married child, right? So I might have a 25-year-old child of mine, okay, but they're married, but I want to sponsor them. I want them to come to the United States, and so I might do that. So depending on your there are different categories even in that. And so, again, not to get too into the weeds here, there are different categories of family-based green cards, and there's different categories of employment-based green cards. And there's a whole chart we have to follow and look at every month to see if your case is called in line. The way I like to compare it is this. I might apply, there's two parts to every green card case. You file part one right now, and that'll, once it gets approved, you have to see when you're allowed to apply for part two. Okay. And that part two may be at the same time. You can file it at the same time as part one, or it may not be for another 18 years, depending on where you fall in this chart, in these categories, what country you were born in. There are a lot of factors that play into it. And every month, the government puts out more information about which cases can file part two. And so you're sort of waiting in this line. I like to compare it to you being at the bakery and taking a ticket, and then you're waiting to get called. And it's not until your name has been called that you can go pick up your fancy cake.
But the timeline is going from a year to 18 years.
That is right, because it depends on it depends on the category that you're in. Employment-based cases are faster for many, but again, the countries of China and India have long wait times. It's related to population. It's related to various factors. There's always people lobbying about how this system could work better. But until there's actually a change, a lot of Chinese and Indians end up having to wait 6 to 10 years for certain employment-based green cards.
Wow. Now, even on an employment base, does it matter what kind of profession as well? Because it sounds like it gets really technical.
Yeah, it is very technical. It is not so the profession is going to matter. The type of things we look at. We need to know who your employer is. Mm-hmm. We need to know the type of profession, the job title that you have. Yeah. Okay. A lot of things can change this. The salary level, your education level. These are all some factors that we would look at first glance, like at a very initial intake. Mm-hmm. This is the very basic information that you would need, because you can imagine there might be, especially like I said, these Chinese and Indians who are waiting for so long. What if they want to change jobs? Oh. Yeah. I mean, you know how it is. Sometimes you don't like an employer for whatever reason. Maybe you're not being treated fairly. Whatever's happening. Mm-hmm. You're not getting promoted. You've really put your, blood, sweat, and tears into this, and nothing is changing. Things may be happening, but you may be stuck in this job because you're waiting on this green card. Mm. So the plight, if you must, for some of these individuals is very real. They have to stick it out sometimes. Depending on where they are in their case, they may be able to transfer their case to another employer. It all depends on where they are in their case. And a lot of technicalities.
Now, kind of share with the audience. So you brought up an event that they're kind of trapped with an employer that they want to leave, and they're already in queue. Mm-hmm. Let's say, for example, you mentioned they might have been a couple of years in already. Right. If they decide to leave, would that reset the clock completely?
So that's a really tricky question, and I think it would be too detail oriented to get into it.
Is it going to be like a Rube Goldberg machine or that chart with a bunch of pictures and like threads and pins?
It's really a situation by situation issue, because you're looking at, where you are in your case proceeding, what's already been filed, how long you've been waiting since you filed it. So there's a lot of things that come into play. And so that's why I say it's a situation by situation case. Okay. So if you've filed one portion of your case, you've been waiting for a minimum of a year, then you may be able to switch employers. The good news is your wait time, if you're in that good, golden spot where you can switch, the good news is your wait time doesn't start all over. Okay. The date that ticket, you can now transfer that ticket with the same date. Okay. To the other employer, but you have to be in that sweet spot to be able to make that change.
Well, this sounds very complicated.
It is complicated.
And you mentioned with the month-to-month change, it's almost like finding out what kind of box of chocolates you're about to get.
Yeah, I mean, I've had times when people are waiting for so long, they're checking it month to month. They're obviously more vested in this than we are, right? Yeah. So they're looking month to month, and then you better believe when their number gets called up, hey, Lalitha, I just looked. Next month, my case is going to be eligible. Of course they're excited. Look how long they've been waiting. Their life changes. And so naturally, now's the time. We're like, yes, bring me XYZ documents. We need to get this file. Let's get this going. And it's really life-changing for them.
Well, that kind of perfectly segues. That was going to be the next question. Like, what is, despite all of this insanity that it sounds like it's kind of out of your control and your client's control. Yeah. What is your favorite part of being an immigration attorney?
I mean, like I said, it really does change these individuals' lives. The joy they have when they get it, the smile when they have their green card or their citizenship certificate, their naturalization certificate, they can't believe that day has arrived because they're really waiting. It doesn't even matter if it's somebody who received it within a year or 2 years. They're still, they have a lot of dreams based on this, what they can do after this. That could be something as easy as applying for just their not for citizenship. They have it before then, but certain visas, once they have it, they can apply for their driver's license. They can't even drive or they can't even work in some situations. They can't get a social security number. That prevents them from doing so much. So an example is when someone gets married and they're here with their spouse, but they're waiting to get their green card. Sometimes it's a catch 2020. And part of proving that they truly are a married couple, this is not a fraudulent marriage. You have to provide all these documents, right? Yeah. That it's not some 90-day fiance trickery, right? We have to show all of this evidence that it's real. Part of it, one of the things that they'll ask for is, give me some copies of bank statements that you share bank accounts, that you share this, that you share this. We want to see that you've really merged your lives together. well, many times they can't get a bank account because they don't have a social security number. So how are we going to do that? So we have to, really figure out how to provide evidence that is actually available. And then you have to sometimes explain why evidence will not be available. It's not for a lack of trying. They want to fuse their bank accounts together, but unfortunately they can't get one here yet. Or they want to show that you're living in this, in the same house. Show me your driver's license. They don't have a driver's license yet. They need to be able to show this. So we have to find other methods of showing that they are truly a married couple living jointly and together.
It's kind of like the chicken and egg.
It is a chicken and the egg. So in some situations, my clients are able to get it. Sometimes it depends what state, because different I say DMV because I'm from Florida originally. Here, what is it? DDS?
I guess.
For the driver's license. I don't know what the initials stand for, but basically you understand, at the driver's license office. Each state has a different set of rules as to what they will accept and when they will allow it, what proof they're looking for. It should be uniform, but it's not. And so depending on that state, they might have been able to get a driver's license or maybe they didn't. So it depends on that state.
Wow. Okay. So not only do they have to go on a month by month, just on a whim, wherever the direction of the winds blow, but also where they live state-wise.
Yeah.
And what employer they're with.
Oh.
What country they're with. What profession with. Okay. What
everything matters. Yes.
Is there anything that doesn't matter?
That's quite a question. No, that's why when we do an intake, when I get on the phone with somebody, first I just get a general idea. In my intake, I'm just asking a few basic questions. Okay. But that's why we have to have a full-blown consultation. The favorite thing attorneys love to hear is, but my friend was able to do, and I said, and I'm so happy for your friend. But I bet you don't know everything about your friend. Like, you don't know that they had this happen in their job and that happened. Nobody's giving you all of the personal details, so you don't know. And that's true of all areas of law. That's not just immigration, even in bankruptcy law. Oh, but my friend was able to do this. Yes, but maybe your friend didn't have as much real estate as you thought. And maybe that was just a perception. I don't know. Situations are different from person to person. And so that's why we have to do a full-blown consultation to really get that information and find out the nitty-gritty. You know what else ends up mattering? I know you wanted me to say these things don't matter, but there's a lot more that matters. We need to know, your exits and entries into the country. Was every time that you came in a valid entry? Or if you did enter the United States one time and it wasn't with appropriate documentation, was it only once? Were you checked at the border? Were you not checked at the border? There's so much that comes into play with immigration. And every bit of it can completely change the trajectory of your case.
So it's almost like walking a tight wire in the middle of a hailstorm that you don't know what direction is going to change minute to minute. Blindfolded is right. What it sounds like.
Yeah, but that's why the job feels so good in helping somebody navigate these storms. I get to be that weatherman out there on TV, just fighting there, but somehow providing more help to those individuals, telling them you don't have to face this alone.
Yeah. Well, as those that are listening in and are thinking, maybe the friend's situation doesn't apply to me. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this by myself because I don't want to go through a hailstorm blindfolded.
Yeah, right.
How can they best find you?
Oh, well, like my friend here, Ali, said, it's always our website, right? So it's alladilaw.com. That's spelled ALLADI. That's my last name. Law, LAW.com. That's the best way to reach me. There's a little contact form on there. If someone wants to, shoot me a message or something. We have text capability from the phone number that's online. Great. So any one of those ways where you can reach me.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So for our listeners, kind of heard from our two amazing guests. Both kind of have a background of really reinventing themselves through kind of the recession, and they kind of share their experiences, whether it's moving to another country and just kind of putting all their chips in and living in a hotel for 3 years, or going to another field and area of law. Since you both kind of reinvented yourself and grew both professionally and business while kind of the world was falling apart around you, and you're kind of addressing the elephant in the room. And where our listeners probably listening right now, it is June of 2023. Some people think we're already in a recession. Some are going into it. Some think we're just going to be just fine. Well, we're not here to pontificate what's going to happen in the future. But since you've both kind of experienced the storms yourself and rose out of that stronger than going into the storm, what are some opportunities that you see on the horizon that you feel that you could take advantage of in your particular field, but also share some words of wisdom for those that might be their first time experiencing this storm themselves in their business, whichever it is in real estate or law? So the question is, since you've both experienced weathering the storm and grew out of it much stronger heading in, for those that are experiencing it for the first time in their professional life or just their young life in general, maybe they were 19, what advice would you give them to navigate those storms? So before we bring our guests back in, this is kind of the legalese portion of the show. So this show is sponsored and brought to you by yours truly, Anthony Chen with Lighthouse Financial Network. Securities and advisory services offered through Royal Alliance Associates, Inc., RAA, member FINRA SIPC. RAA is separately owned, and other entities or marketing names, products, or services referenced here are independent of RAA. Our main office address is at 575 Broad Hollow Road in Melville, New York, 11747. You can best reach me. My phone here is 631-465-9090, extension 5075, or my email, which is really just my full name, Anthony Chen, CHEN, LFN, LLC.com, or you can just connect with me on LinkedIn. Just again, my name, Anthony Chen. I'm the guy with the glasses with the funny look with the LFN logo behind me. So bring out two amazing guests back in. So the question again is, you've weathered through your recession storm in 2008, reinvented yourself, became much stronger. So what advice would you give to those who are, one, going to be navigating the storm for the first time, and two, now that you've experienced it once, how do you see yourself leaping forward with this next storm?
So yeah, I think so. Speaking personally, just to get really tactical, overly tactical for a second, but I think tactical sometimes is valuable for on the listening side, especially with real estate because it's hands-on. Is one thing I've been doing a lot more of in the last little bit as interest rates have risen. Is every deal that I approach, I put at the forefront owner finance. So we know that interest rates are high right now, and they're probably going to get higher. Taking on a 9% mortgage at 25 years is probably not the smartest move if you can avoid that. So go to a seller and say, look, I'll buy your asset and I'll buy it at full price. You want, for example, $500,000 for it? Okay, I'll do it at $510,000. But you're going to take back the mortgage. Hopefully they don't have a mortgage already on it because that becomes a whole other situation. But let's just say that the property was paid off. I'll buy it for $510,000 and you take back, whatever, regardless of, I don't know what your down payment would be. Let's say it's $25,000. I'll give you the down payment of $25,000. You take back the rest of the mortgage, but you have to do it at 3 or 4%. Mm-hmm. Right now is the opportunity for you to be able to do that. And they're probably, if they're in the right position, they're probably going to be agreeable to it because that's really their only option of being able to move their product, i.e. their home. Mm-hmm. And so getting creative in these kind of environments can be very good. So in the last 4 purchases I've made on the vacation rental side and the hotel side have all been owner finance in that exact vein. Mm-hmm. Where one of the deals I did was at 0% financing on the owner finance side. So I guess getting tactical again you can jump in and create some of these creative opportunities in these environments. Mm-hmm. And so that's one piece of advice I'd say. I'd say in general, from a going through a recession, just to understand the framework for yourself should be caution, absolutely. But at the same time, look at where the opportunities are and look at how you can be resourceful and push for those opportunities. Just going back to the exact tactical example I just gave you. And then really, quick plug for you is, working with someone like yourself who can help them navigate some of these situations. Because I think having a mentor, having someone who can give you the financial advice that especially for people who are just getting their feet wet in the financial world. It's going to be super important. So yeah, I mean, you haven't paid me to say this, but working with someone who's a professional and who has a good reputation and bandwidth behind them on some of these issues. So that's what my advice would be.
Thank you.
So I'm going to look at it from two different perspectives. One, from someone who's perhaps already in the United States, being an immigration attorney, this is how I think, right? So someone who's already here, I think this recession that we're in, or, flowing into, however you want to term this, is we have to look at it as to how it's also different than the previous one. And a lot of it had to do with things that occurred during COVID. And I think that a lot of people started looking into the side hustle. And this is an opportunity to be able to reinvent yourself. So this might be a time when, if there's something you like, to try that out. Or if you don't have the education for it, maybe go back to school and to learn more and get the education in an area that you truly want to pursue. This is an area that you're truly interested in. So this may be the time during a recession to go back to school. That might be the thing to do. But I also see where there are businesses that are struggling for employees. That's an ongoing issue, and that's in the restaurant industry. We're seeing it a lot in the service industry. And when we're seeing that, that's why I am starting to see individuals come to me and saying, hey, I'm not able to find anybody. We've been looking for over 6 months. I really need to fill this role. What is possible? There's a person who's willing to work from such and such country. What's possible? And so people are starting to look, saying, I am not able to otherwise fill these roles. So this is a time when they're looking to immigrants to fill the roles, because in the U.S. there are roles that are open that are not being filled. So maybe because they're pursuing their side gig and going back to school because they want to pursue their dreams. So the point is that this, I feel that we have to use the opportunity of what's happening right now to, really go ahead and accept the changes and say, how can I adapt to it? And these are the ways I think, people should consider adapting.
Great. Well, thank you. Before we close out the show, share us with the audience, how best can they find you, reach out to you, learn more, whether they want to go into real estate or seek some advice on an immigration attorney bit, or kind of the advice on weathering the storm.
Again, www.alijamal.com, and or add me to LinkedIn. Ali Jamal is just find me. Ali Jamal, Stablegold Hospitality. Be happy to connect on there as well.
Great.
Okay, so mine is Alladi Law, ALLADI Law, LAW, .com, or 404-981-8778. You can reach me.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Now, this is a little bit of called Anthony Chen's financial take. So you've kind of heard from our two amazing guests in ways of either moving tactically or looking through a different perspective, preparing through whether we're in one or going to one or not going heading to a recession. We're not here to pontificate that, but rather setting one up, at least financially, to really grow in leaps and bounds. And I know sometimes for the listener, they're thinking, well, I'm right now struggling with this and that. How can I really take this advice going forward? Well, we kind of heard from Ali's story, especially mother coming in as a refugee with nothing, and she built a multi-million-dollar portfolio. Or what I like to harken back to looking back a little into history, for those of my listeners that follow me on LinkedIn, is I have this thing called Business History Tuesdays. And during the U.S. recession, or Great Recession, back in 1860s into the 70s, during that time, the same time, right out of that we got Thomas Edison and all these other electronic gears and tools and equipment that we are now using in the palm of our hands that didn't even exist back in the 1870s. And they were able to build new businesses, reinvent themselves, and in the middle of an absolute, kabuki theater to clean it up for our listeners. So for those who were kind of on the fence thinking, what is it going to be like for either my business, my professional career, what opportunities, rather than thinking of trying to control the storm that we know that we just can't really control, lean into the direction of the winds and say, well, let's look for opportunities rather than really just looking at threats. So whether it is in the financial world, investments, or just really one's professional growth, look for opportunities rather than worrying about things we can't control. And that's a little bit of Anthony's Financial Take. Thank you for listening to Family Business Radio.